Sure. Here is section 1, 500 words, of your story script, written in a tight, emotionally driven narrative style suitable for a faceless infidelity video. There is no fluff or repetition, only meaningful progression and high-quality storytelling. It started the weekend my brother left town. He had a quick work trip, 2 days, maybe 3, and asked if I could keep Adrian company. I didn't question it. Adrian had been like family for years. One of those friends who somehow ended up in all our childhood memories, movie nights, family BBQs, late-night drives. The kind you trust without needing to think twice. I hadn't seen Adrian in a while. He looked different when he arrived, older, sharper, and strangely more confident. The boyish grin was still there, but now it came with longer eye contact and a deeper tone in his voice. I told myself I was just noticing what I'd always ignored. The first night was uneventful. We ate pizza, scrolled through Netflix like always, made sarcastic comments about bad acting. Nothing felt unusual except the quiet. Without my brother around, the house echoed more, the space between words grew longer, and silence somehow said too much. He sat closer than I remembered, but I told myself it was just the couch. I caught him watching me once. His eyes didn't move when I turned. I laughed it off, pretending it was nothing, but that look stayed with me. It wasn't teasing. It wasn't innocent. The next morning, I made coffee and found him already in the kitchen, shirtless, humming some old song under his breath. I felt awkward for a second but shook it off. He smiled like he always did, charming, familiar, safe. We talked more that day. Deeper things. He asked about my last relationship. I told him the truth, that it ended badly, that I'd been emotionally exhausted. He listened, really listened, with this intensity that made me feel seen. It was strange how quickly it became easy to open up. He mentioned how he'd always thought I deserved better. I looked at him, half smiling, half confused. It felt like a compliment wrapped in something heavier. I didn't reply. Instead, I changed the subject. But something had shifted. By evening, I caught myself checking how I looked in the mirror before going downstairs. Just a little lip gloss, brushing out my hair. I told myself it was nothing, habit, boredom, just being polite. That night, we watched another movie. This time, we sat even closer. I noticed the way his arm rested behind me. He didn't touch me, but the space between us disappeared. His voice got softer when he spoke to me. I laughed at his jokes a little longer than I should have. I told myself I was just lonely, that I missed attention, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down I knew I was lying. Not to him, not to my brother, but to myself. Because part of me had already started to wonder if something dangerous was beginning and whether I wanted to stop it at all. Here is section 2, 500 words, of the story, written with precision and emotional clarity, progressing the narrative without repetition or unnecessary detail. The next day felt different. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't saying anything, but there was a quiet understanding in the way we moved around each other. Conversations turned personal quickly. He asked me if I'd ever felt invisible in my own life. I said yes before even thinking about it. He nodded like he already knew. He told me about a girl he'd loved once, how it ended without closure, how he hadn't really let anyone in since. His voice was lower than usual, not performative, just honest. I felt myself leaning into that honesty, like it was something I'd been waiting to hear from someone. Anyone. At some point, I realized I didn't see him as my brother's friend anymore. He was just Adrian, a man sitting across from me, understanding parts of me I didn't know were visible. When he complimented the way I thought, the way I moved, it didn't feel like flattery. It felt like he meant it. I noticed the way he looked at me when I spoke. Not just listening, but studying. It didn't make me uncomfortable. It made me feel important. Wanted. That feeling crept in slowly and stayed. It lingered in the air between us, making everything else feel quieter. That night, we sat in the living room again. No distractions. Just the sound of the rain outside and the low hum of music playing somewhere in the background. I could feel his eyes on me, and for the first time, I didn't pretend not to notice. He told me I was different from what he expected. Softer. Smarter. More dangerous in a way that made him nervous. I laughed, but the way he said it, it wasn't a joke. He wasn't flirting anymore. He was revealing something. And I didn't know how to respond to it. Then, without thinking, I asked him why he'd never dated anyone seriously. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I've never been around someone I couldn't forget after they left the room." His gaze didn't waver. I didn't look away either. We didn't touch. Not yet. But the silence that followed was louder than anything else. I felt it in my throat, in my chest, everywhere. My body wasn't reacting like it should. It didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I told myself I could still walk away, that this was just emotional confusion, harmless. But deep down, I knew we had already crossed a line. Not physically, emotionally. And that kind of betrayal runs deeper because you can't take it back or blame it on a single moment. He reached out and placed his hand near mine, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. That distance between our hands was the only boundary left. And I knew, if either of us moved an inch closer, everything would change. Here is section 3, 500 words, of your story, continuing the narrative with direct, emotionally impactful writing. The betrayal unfolds clearly, without repetition or filler. The next morning, the silence wasn't awkward. It was charged. I woke up earlier than usual, restless, unsure of what I was expecting. When I came into the kitchen, he was already there, sipping coffee, like nothing had changed. But everything had. He looked at me and smiled, not politely, not playfully, but like he knew something I hadn't said out loud. I poured my coffee, careful not to meet his eyes too long. But the air between us felt heavier, more dangerous. Like we both knew where this was going and neither of us was willing to stop it. We stood too close, talked too softly, laughed too easily. The conversation didn't matter anymore. Words were a formality. He reached for a plate behind me, and his hand brushed my back. Just a touch. Just enough. I didn't move. He came closer, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. When his lips touched mine, I let him. I didn't push him away. I kissed him back. It wasn't frantic or clumsy. It was slow, certain, intentional. When it deepened, I felt my heart pounding, but not from fear. From the knowledge that I had made a choice. Not a mistake. A choice. I pulled away first, but he didn't say a word. Just looked at me, waiting. I could have ended it. Walked away. Blamed the wine, the moment, the rain. But I didn't. He whispered that we didn't need to pretend anymore. That he'd wanted me for longer than he should have. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know if he meant before this weekend. I only knew that I was still standing there, not moving. I don't know if I loved him in that moment or just needed to feel wanted. But when he touched my face and leaned in again, I didn't hesitate. I let everything else fall away, logic, guilt, my brother's trust, until all that remained was the way he made me feel. The rest happened in silence. No promises. No questions. Just the sound of breath and skin, and the unspoken admission that we'd both crossed a line we couldn't return from. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, consuming, intimate in a way that left me exposed. Afterward, I stared at the ceiling, unable to process what had just happened. He reached for me, rested his hand on my waist like it meant something. I didn't respond. I felt empty. Not used, not broken, just wrong. Off balance. Like I'd undone something important inside myself. He said it felt right. That it had always been coming. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't tell if it felt right or if I had simply stopped caring about what was right at all. And in that quiet, tangled mess of sheets and guilt, I realized it wasn't a moment I could undo. It was a truth I'd now have to live with. Here is section 4, 500 words, delivering the emotional aftermath and closure with clarity and impact, staying focused and free of repetition. I avoided his eyes the rest of the day. Every word felt mechanical, every movement rehearsed. He acted like nothing had shifted, like what we did was natural, justified. But I couldn't look at him without feeling something sharp in my chest. Guilt didn't arrive slowly. It crashed in all at once. When my brother returned that evening, the house felt smaller. I hugged him longer than usual, hoping he couldn't feel the difference in me. Adrian greeted him like always, perfectly casual, wearing the same smile he'd worn when he walked through our door. It made me sick. I kept my distance. I barely spoke. My brother didn't notice. Too tired, too distracted, but I couldn't stop watching Adrian. How easily he joked. How comfortably he lied. He didn't avoid me, but he didn't push either. He knew I was unraveling and chose to let it happen on my own. That night, Adrian messaged me from across the hall. Just one line. I don't regret it. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because I regretted everything. I started imagining if my brother ever found out. The look on his face. The silence that would follow. The permanent damage. It made my stomach twist. He trusted both of us. And I let that trust shatter without a second thought. I stopped going into shared spaces. I stayed upstairs. Short answers. No eye contact. Adrian noticed but said nothing. That hurt more than anything, how easily he let it go. Like I was just one more mistake in a long list he'd stopped counting. The worst part wasn't what happened. It was the silence after. The way I felt when I was alone. I expected sadness, maybe confusion. But what I felt was shame. Deep, constant, inescapable. It followed me like a shadow, and no amount of pretending could shake it off. I realized he didn't love me. He loved the attention, the thrill, the secrecy. And I had fallen for the illusion of intimacy, mistaking it for something it never was. He didn't chase me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even ask if I was okay. A week later, he left. No explanation. Just a quick goodbye to my brother, and nothing more. I watched from the window, numb, wondering if he'd even think of me after the door closed. I doubted it. I never told my brother. I couldn't. Not because I was protecting him, but because I didn't want to see the look of betrayal on his face. I couldn't handle the truth becoming something spoken. Instead, I distanced myself from both of them. I needed space to remember who I was before that weekend, before I allowed myself to believe that desire could ever replace self-respect. It took time, but I stopped waiting for closure. I learned some wounds don't heal clean. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. And some versions of love are just lies we tell ourselves in the dark.